Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I appreciate everyone, and I'm so glad you thoroughly enjoy listening to stories because, as I say, there's nothing better in this world than a good story, so I'm so glad you've joined me tonight. But before we get started, go and get yourself an effervescent sparkling drink or some coffee or something. And if it's something unusual, please let me know about it because I do love hearing from you. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, James Martin runs along the undulating riverbank, strewn with wild late summer growth and rocky appendages that jut out precariously from either side of the riverbank. He's frantically looking for his sister Emma. His kayak is abandoned by the side of the river, lying upside down like a seal basking on a sandy beach. He cannot see his sister's kayak anywhere, nor are there any signs of her. The silent stillness is only injected with the movement of the swift-blowing cool breeze that causes the trees to whoosh and moan, some of their boughs creaking as they jiggle, while their leaves rustle. Then there's the noisy sound of the foaming, frothy water crashing violently against the rocks. Yet despite these natural, pleasant sounds of nature, there's a baleful silence that lingers inauspiciously in the atmosphere. It is the sounds that James does not hear that arrest his attention, that demand his gravest concern, and prevail upon him an impending sense of dread that gnaws away at his gut like a mouse at a piece of cheese. He cannot hear the cries of his sister. That's not good. Even if she was crying out in pain, that would be significantly better than the bleak absence of her voice. If only he could hear it ringing through the trees, which would be to James like a sweet-sounding bell. James is out of breath. He's panting as he lunges across the ground, in frenzied wide strides, at a rapidly fast pace. "Where are you, Emma?" James mumbles under his breath. "Where the hell are you? Please, God, may nothing bad have happened to you. Please, God, no." James is praying to God as he clings on to his flagging hope, like a drowning man at sea, clasping for dear life onto the debris of a broken raft. He scrutinizes the river, scrunching his eyes up to look for any signs of movement or the bright colour of Emma's life jacket, but he sees nothing. Why can't he see a damn thing? James' world spins out of control as his thoughts begin to whirl around and around so frantically fast, like the swirling clothes in a tumble-dryer. In his dazed, disorientated, muddy confusion, panic consumes every cell of his body, as an adrenaline spike like he's never known before burns brightly through his bloodstream. His legs are inoculated with a forceful power he has never known before. If he could run like this at school, he'd win all the races hands down. The stoic, stubborn riverbank remains resolutely undisturbed, very calm, a direct antithesis to James and his growing sense of unease. The billowing, low-slung embankments on either side of the river are fringed with the growth of old, ancient, gnarled sculptural trees that claw their way up to the sky like hunched-back old men. James does not stop to consider their beauty. His thoughts are fiercely pigeonholed onto one focus alone, finding his sister. But where is she? It's a beautiful sunny day. The weather has suddenly shifted. Only an hour before, dark clouds had hovered above the sky, threatening to unleash buckets of rain. But their sombre darkness retreated, the clouds dissipated, and now the sun's sparkling rays are dancing through the denim blue canopy. It's hard to believe anything inauspicious could have happened on this unassuming morning, but James instinctively senses something is very wrong. Very, very wrong. Suffice to say, this profound sense of foreboding hangs around him like a thick, cloying dark blanket that he would gladly discard. But this baleful feeling clings on to him with the tenacity of a skin-tight overcoat that cannot easily be removed or dislodged. This is the Ozarks, in the heartland of America, with a verdant, rugged landscape, pierced by sculptural rocky appendages that impertinently jut out of the sumptuous viridescent vegetation here, and make no apologies for surrendering their unyielding contours like the humongous underbellies of large sea creatures under the threshold of a warm sun, where they have baked very contentedly for thousands of years, becoming aesthetically prepossessing sculptural features and prominent landmarks for many of the locals here. Let's just say that although beguilingly beautiful, this prepossessing landscape is not immune to adversity, to danger, to deadly accidents. The Ozarks are known for their abundance of sparkling springs, waterfalls, lakes, caverns, caves, and sinkholes, and are best described as a forested group of highlands in the south-central United States, extending southwestwards from St. Louis, Missouri, to the Arkansas River. James and his family are staying at their weekend retreat in a simplistic wooden cabin that had once belonged to their great-grandfather. They come here regularly, almost every weekend, as the cabin, although not far from home, is located in a prime position, overlooking a powerful gushing river of obstreperous white water, a superb spot for kayaking, which is one of the reasons the family love coming here. They enjoy exploring this fetching terrain that will so easily steal your breath away, for the Ozarks are intriguingly beautiful, and for an outdoor adventurer, an Aladdin's cave of exciting experiences and opportunities, which draw many people to this part of the world every year. James and his sister Emma live with their parents in one of the charming old Victorian houses in Eureka Springs that graciously hugs the edges of a cliff along a secluded winding mountainside street. Eureka Springs is nestled in the heart of the Ozarks. This stunningly charming town possesses block after block of one-of-a-kind eclectic shops, renowned for their quirky individuality, fine art galleries, craft euphoriums, spas, historic hotels, restaurants and cafes. The list goes on and on. The Martin family find the cabin to be so perfect for the weekend, to enjoy a spot of trout fishing, mountain biking, riding horses, riding ATVs, hiking, exploring, and the list goes on. But last and not least, kayaking, which is a hobby the family have enjoyed for many years. James knows that under no circumstances was he and his sister Emma to ever go kayaking unsupervised. But when have the rules of a strict parent not been made to be broken? James was 14, his sister 13, and the two of them were quite athletic. They'd been kayaking for as long as they could remember, and were quietly confident about their ability to navigate the tumultuous currents of the river. By all accounts, they were well acquainted with the blasting water, the fresh feel of spray on their faces, and some almost harrowing near-death experiences. But kayaking was like a drug you wanted to go to time and time again, as it was the most exhilarating sport that made you feel vibrantly alive. James and his sister Emma didn't believe they needed supervision in their kayaking, not from the adults. In truth, James secretly perceived himself to be better at kayaking than his father, although he would not dare admit as much. He would not want to fray his father's ego. Put it this way, his dad might be stronger, a lot more robust, but James considered himself much more nimble. He'd always been quick to manoeuvre his kayak out of precariously tricky situations, whereas his father was not nearly as efficient and often found himself getting stranded and caught up in rocky corners that were difficult to navigate your way out of. "You're never to go kayaking on your own," his father had drilled into his two youngsters. "I wouldn't be happy you negotiating that water alone, especially when the weather is windy or the water is rough or choppy. You do understand what I'm saying. This is no joke. Accidents happen out there, and kayaking can be treacherously dangerous if you're not prudently careful." "Yes, Dad," James had said, hanging his head bashfully. Had his father read his thoughts? James had often clandestinely dreamed of taking out the kayaks on the river with his sister, and without their parents' knowledge. Suffice to say, for James and his sister Emma, the idea of kayaking on their own was great fun, so much more fun without the adults overseeing their every move. It was on this perfect weekend, the ideal opportunity to rebel against their parents' authority, had magnanimously presented itself as their parents went into town to observe an exhibition of artwork at one of the local galleries there. The art had been produced by a talented local artist that was a great friend of their parents, who believed they were duty-bound to attend the exhibition in order to support their friend. The locals in the area are friendly people who enjoy supporting local businesses and encouraging each other. Community spirit thrives in this part of the world. There was going to be a fabulous celebration, lunchtime drinks and snacks. The ribbon would be cut, the doors open for curious visitors, while champagne glasses were going to be filled with bubbles, as everybody toasted the artist's great work. It would seem some serious buyers interested in the artist would be there to talk to her, and to hear her thoughts on what inspired her to create some of her pieces. James had seen her work, even though he was only 14. It was vibrant and colourful and had a look of Picasso about it, which he found very appealing, even for one so young. The parents had left the two children behind at the cabin, firmly believing they were quite capable of looking after themselves. At first James had been reluctant about taking the kayaks out onto the river without the parents being around. He had remembered his father's solemn warning and felt a sense of responsibility towards his sister. It would serve their best interest to listen to their father's judicious advice. But James had underestimated his sister Emma. Let's just say that Emma could be artfully persuasive if she wanted to be. One day they'd been asked to sell magazines on a street corner to tourists visiting the Ozarks. His sister had audaciously sold all her magazines without even batting an eyelid, while James had struggled to offload even one. The poor man who had purchased one magazine from James had almost done so under duress, as James obsequiously explained that he had sold not a single copy. The man felt a slight pressure to be kind to the young boy, possibly out of sympathy for his sorry plight, and agreed to buy a magazine. "All right, son, give me one then," he had said, with a resigned sigh. "Who knows, the wife might find it interesting, even if I don't." Emma had the gift of the gab, and it had not gone by unnoticed in the town. Many an art gallery owner had hinted to Emma, "When you're old enough, young lady, come and apply for a job with us. We could do with someone with your zealous enthusiasm to encourage buyers to part with their money, as I don't think anyone could do it as well as you can. You could sell ice to an Eskimo, make him think it was a good idea to buy it from you." James knew when his sister was older that due to her suaveness, she would be snapped up in a prominent sales position in one of the many shops or art galleries in Eureka Springs. Now she was masterfully applying her adroit powers of loquacity on him, with such a compelling, influential persuasiveness that James had not seen coming. Emma had made him feel as if going kayaking had been his idea all along, when the reverse was actually true. "Go on, James. Mum and Dad aren't here. It's the perfect opportunity to go kayaking without them. We've talked about it for so long, don't you remember? Just imagine it. It'll be just the two of us and the river. Besides, you're always saying you're better than Dad. And you know what I think? You're absolutely right. You're much better at kayaking than Dad is. Granted, he's stronger than you, but you're much more fluid in your movements. You almost glide over the water seamlessly. I've seen Dad really struggle. I mean, really struggle. He puts on that I'm in control look, but I don't buy it for a second. It's almost like handling a musical instrument, isn't it? You're smooth and fluid. Dad is jerky and uncoordinated." James's chest inflated like a pumped-up beach ball with pride at his sister's effusive, rather unexpected compliments. Any more flattery like this, it would make him burst like a balloon. His sister had never told him this before. It was pleasing to have his personal, clandestine observations finally confirmed. It was not that he was conceited or stuck up in this regard, but he knew he was very good at kayaking, and one day when he gained that muscular advantage that comes with age, his kayaking would make his father's attempts look almost futile, even pathetic. "You think so?" he asks, hoping his sister would shower him with yet more compliments. "Absolutely. You know I wouldn't give you another compliment like this if I didn't mean it. You're natural on that water. If I'm with you, I will feel safe. You don't need Dad watching out for us. I mean, we're not babies, are we? We've been kayaking forever and a day. We're experienced. We know what we're doing. Probably more so than Mum and Dad do. They might be stronger than us, but guess what? We're much better than they are, and I'm not ashamed to admit it myself. I suppose modesty is not one of my finer points, but what's the point in hiding our lights under a bushel? If you've got it, flaunt it. That's what I say. Even so, sis, I'm not sure we should actually do this. I know it will be fun, but you know what Dad said. We can't go out onto the water without being supervised. It's pretty windy out there this morning, which can make the water more treacherously choppy. It does look rough out there. You have to admit it. Oh, come on, James. Don't be a boring stick in the mud. The fact that the river is more choppy than usual makes it all the more exciting, don't you see? It'll be so much fun. You know you want to. I can see the eagerness on your face. You're not fooling anyone, James, least of all me. Mum and Dad will be gone for 3 hours or so. What they don't know will never hurt them. When they return, our kayaks will look as if they haven't been used at all. We'll make sure they're perfectly dry. They won't know a thing. But behind their backs, we would have had a blast. You know the saying, while the cat's away, the mouse do play. The 2 big fat cats are out now. This is our moment. And you want to turn it down? That's nonsensical, James. All right, says James. We'll do it then. Before he could change his mind, he and his sister were now in their kayaks, laughing as they were swept down the rapidly moving water, feeling the exhilaration of the wind blowing against their faces. The sky was overcast and grey. It looked like a storm was brewing, as faint rumbles of thunder could be heard in the distance. But they didn't care. It was exhilarating out on the water. "This is so fun!" Emma cries out. And for a moment James agreed. But that moment was not going to last for very long, when James began to realise that the water was not friendly today. Not friendly at all. It was quite windy as the wind punnelled against their faces, and the powerful white water thundered down its long vertical trajectory. James plunged his paddle in the rapidly moving ice-cold water and smiled warmly at his sister. "The river's high," he tells his sister. "We should easily be able to skirt over the rocks over there without much of a problem." Emma grinned back at her brother, her bright blue eyes sparkling with enthusiasm, as cold droplets of water splashed over her skin, and her shoulder-length brown hair hung around her angelic face in a curtain of wet strands. Emma was oblivious to the cold, had no concern of how wet she was. Her focus was on the job at hand. It was evident that she was pumped up with adrenaline. Her small, trim body bounced with an exhilaration that was addictive to her. Who needed drugs or alcohol when you got a high like this? As dicing with danger was the most exciting feeling in the entire world. Emma understood it all too well, having always enjoyed living on the edge. Once on a television programme the family had watched together, a man called Robert Alain Philippe, a French rock climber known as the human spider, without any protective harnesses, skirted huge skyscrapers around the world, with only a bag of chalk and a pair of climbing shoes. Sometimes he looked like he was walking on a tightrope. One wrong move and he would fall to his death, without a doubt. Emma's parents had clutched the furniture in the living room so tightly, their knuckles white with apprehension. It was almost as if the unyielding furniture gave them a strength they needed to get through the hurdles of watching this man, so recklessly dicing with his own life. They really didn't want to watch him, but try as they might to look away, they were completely transfixed, their hearts gripped with trepidation, their wide eyes glued to the screen, as they observed this idiosyncratic cookie-like character navigating himself masterfully up and down the skyscraper. They had not understood the man's cravings to live on the edge of life, to hang precariously on the sides of a building, relying on his nimble dexterity, remarkable agility, balance and strength to help him overcome the adversity he faced. Emma had understood it all. She had marvelled at the human spider, easily relating to the intense rush of euphoria he was feeling, in doing something that invited death to swallow him whole, if given the chance. It was a risk that made the experience all the more riveting. Let's just say for Emma, kayaking in the fast-moving, frisky water of the river presented such exciting, tempestuous challenges, especially when the river was as wild and untamed as it was today. Emma knew their father would not allow them to go kayaking in unbridled conditions like this, but she had loquaciously manipulated James to go with her. Kayaking alone was not fun. It was an activity that needed to be shared. She knew that complimenting her brother would be the perfect way to get him to bite the bait. It had been easier than she'd expected, with her brother putting up little resistance. The white water crashed over the rocks, frothing and rising up against the kayak in rambunctious waves. "Let's go through those rapids," she said, before James had a chance to protest. Then there she was, digging her paddles enthusiastically into the water, and entering the spinning roller coaster of white water that pounded her so hard, backwards and forwards, jerking her kayak through its white ribbons. She could only cling onto her paddle, hoping that she could survive this dangerous manoeuvre, where there was no safety belts or railing to securely hold you in place. This is what made kayaking so exhilarating. This is why she enjoyed the sport so very much. Living on the edge was the best feeling in the entire world. James watched in horror as the vivacious ebullient water of the roaring rapids was rougher than they expected. The water was high. It was out of control, like an inebriated drunk that needs hundreds of men to hold him down because he's suddenly become so strong. But nothing could restrain the tenacity of this water, which had a life and personality of its own. Today its mood was cantankerous, capriciously belligerent, as it tossed and turned, fighting angrily against their kayaks, as if determined to topple them over. Emma's kayak was thrown around and tossed over some rocky outcrops. Then all James could see was his sister's bright orange life jacket disappear from view, as the kayak and his sister were swept away under the white curtain of fast-moving water, where he knew she had now entered some much more perilous rapids. How he wished he could stop her, but it was too late. In the distance he could see Emma's kayak, flipping over on its side. It began racing down the water like a fragile white paper boat, swept away by the fast-moving current. James could not see his sister anymore. Was she swimming in the current? Was she still in the kayak? He couldn't be sure, for his sister had now abandoned his field of vision. The kayak is not supposed to flip over like this, James thinks to himself. This is crazy. In a million month of Sundays, he would never have anticipated this happening to them. James managed to get his kayak to the shoreline with a great struggle as he wrestled against the aggressive currents of the water that knew no mercy or restraint. The grey sky that loomed ominously above him seemed menacing and foreboding. A storm threatened to add to the drama of this bodeful moment. James was exhausted, his body drenched, his hair soaked. He threw his kayak onto the ground and hurriedly raced down the banks of the water to follow his sister's kayak. Time was of the essence. His sister's life was in jeopardy. If he didn't get to her in time, it could be too late. Time stood still as the surreal event unfolded before him, like a haunting, compromising scene in a horror movie. He needed to get to her. He needed to get to her fast before it was too late. What was he thinking? How could he have been so stupid? Any fool could see that this water was way too perilous for kayaking. But despite his intuitive warnings that had whispered to him not to go, he had failed to listen, for the egotistical part of himself had taken dominance. The weather seemed to change as quickly as putting a coin in the slot of a karaoke machine at a local bar to play a brand new song. The sun peered cheerfully through the clouds. Everything looked beautiful. The day had become magnificent, but to James, nothing was beautiful about a day that clawed at his heart like an angry cat trying to escape the confines of its cage. In anguish, he calls out his sister's name. "Emma! Emma! Emma! Emma!" The sound of his shrill voice revealed his desperation, like a whistle that seemed to echo across the rugged terrain. James perceives a vacuous, disturbing hollow, growing wider, wider, deeper and deeper inside him, as a numbing feeling spreads across his body. In his gut, he knows exactly what he's going to find. He knows that it's not going to be good. He can feel his heart pounding violently through his chest, as a nauseating fear consumes him. He is not acquainted with a fear like this. No one should ever have to feel like this. Then he sees the horrifying sight that no eyes would ever wish to see. His sister's upside-down kayak is being straddled by the rapids' fast-moving water that is still treacherously dangerous. Then he sees it, At first he thinks that it's a bear, as this huge, bulky, sturdy figure is moving in the powerful water without much difficulty and swimming in the frisky current in pursuit of his sister's kayak, and hopefully his sister. The creature turns the kayak around. He's lifting up his sister, who'd been floating upside down in the water. James stares and stares. He's sure he has to be dreaming. Please God, may this be a dream, and he'll wake up to find his sister alive and well again. The idiosyncratic creature swims back with his sister in one of his arms, while he uses the other arm to swim. When he gets to the edge of the water, he climbs out, holding Emma's deflated body in his hands. James realizes at once that this creature is not a bear. It looks like an enormous man, covered with hair, that has tree-trunk-sized legs, a powerful body, built like a burly army tank. His long, flowing dark hair is totally drenched, so James can see the grey skin beneath, revealing a mind-blowing muscular density that would be the dream and envy of any aspiring bodybuilder. But James doubted anyone he'd ever seen could measure up to the strength of this hairy man. He looked capable of lifting up a heavy piece of farming machinery without even breaking a sweat. But this creature, or hairy man, was much more nimble and agile than the Incredible Hulk he'd seen on television, a fictional character who possessed a marvellous, impressive strength. James runs towards the hairy man to greet his sister, whom he's carrying so gracefully in his powerful overlong arms. He places Emma gently down on the river bank. The hairy man is slapping her face and trying to wake her up, but she is unresponsive. James rushes over to his sister, deciding to take charge. The hairy man respectively steps away, curiously watching as James begins to thrash his sister's chest and give her the CPR he'd learnt at school. "Emma, wake up! Wake up, Emma! Wake up!" Emma's eyes are glazed over, like a dead fish. Water comes out of her throat, but she does not cough nor splutter. There's a deep bloody gouge on her head that suggests that she took a fierce beating against one of the rocks. "Don't do this to me, for God's sake! Don't do this to me, Emma!" says James, punching at her chest as hard as he can, again and again, to get some kind of a response from his sister. "Emma, wake up! Emma, wake up!" But his sister remains limp and lifeless, like a rag doll. James continues to pound at his sister's chest for dear life, his tears pouring down his cheeks in rivulets. "Emma, wake up! Don't do this to me, Emma! Don't do this to me!" For a second, James glances up at the hairy man. "I think she's dead! I think she's dead!" The hairy man is nodding. His deep, dark, soulful eyes look empathetic and compassionate. It's clearly apparent he relates to James's grief and is well acquainted with the feeling of losing someone you love. He speaks to James in a strange ancient language that he doesn't understand. "Omakani, noboshani, nabolobo adaniso, ivoto." But the comforting words are translated in his mind almost at once. How does that even happen? He heard the man's words in his own head. No one had ever spoken like this to him before. But James listens earnestly to his words. "She's gone. I saw her soul leave her body. She says she's sorry. She had to go." James stares at the hairy man nonplussed. The hairy man's deep-set eyes are benevolent and ever so kind. "No," says James. "No, she's not dead. She's not dead. She can't be. She can't be." He slapped his sister's face on both sides, begging her to wake up, but she remains rigidly fixed. The strange hairy man shakes his head, "Omogaba, amigoshava," and gives James an encouraging nudge with the curled fingers of his hands. "It'll be all right. Your sister's fine. You'll see her one day. It was her time to go. Be at peace with it. Omakeva no bosha, amasila banese, o poshafi." Then just like that, the mysterious hairy man glided away and was gone. But James did not want him to go. His presence had offered him some comfort. "Please don't go! Please don't go!" But the hairy man has slipped into the trees. James now feels terribly alone. Now that he was gone, he was hit with the gravity of the harrowing last few minutes, the worst minutes of his life that he would never, ever be able to forget as long as he lived. There were some things that could not be forgotten, and this was one of them. A moment in time that would be indelibly scarred on his heart. You might not physically see it, but James knew it would remain on him forever. A plethora of unrestrained tears, unlike the clouds this afternoon that had held back their rain, began to spill down the banks of his face, like the raindrops on a glass window pane, and an uncontrolled sob emanated from the back of his throat. James had no memory of the next few hours. Of that day, everything was veiled in a fuzzy blur, as if he was sitting on a train half asleep as the countryside had rolled past the window at one hell of a speed. That was how the day had panned out for him. Well, the rest of it anyway. He had observed the police, the coroner, the funeral company picking up his sister's body on a large stretcher. He'd heard the coroner saying to his parents, "She wouldn't have suffered. She was knocked out by the rocks with blunt force trauma. She drowned as a result. She wouldn't have known much." There had been a kind counsellor speaking to his parents, and even to him at one point. James could barely remember her words. She had said something about how accidents happen, and how Emma wouldn't have felt a thing as she'd been knocked out unconscious, and that it was an unfortunate accident. Tragedy is a part of life, she had said. James had barely listened to her, but everything remained vague and indeterminate as he was caught up in a thick, foggy cloud of obscurity. One thing he did recall vividly, with a crystal-clear clarity, were his parents' mortified faces when they realised what had happened. Both of his parents arrived back at the cabin in a jovial mood. They discovered 2 of their children's kayaks had gone missing, and their children were nowhere to be seen. They had dashed over to the river and found their son James holding his sister's deceased body, the tears pouring down his face. James's father had pushed him away, attempting desperately to revive his sister. For a moment James clung to the hope of a miracle, but he knew his sister was already gone. His mother had screamed, then his parents had sobbed uncontrollably, clutching at each other desperately, as James watched them helplessly, knowing that all this was his fault. He knew if he had put his foot down, refused his sister's pleas to go kayaking, none of this would ever have transpired. James knew his father was furious. "What the hell have you done, son? Look at that river. It's very, very rough today. I wouldn't even go kayaking in there myself in these conditions. But you and your sister deliberately disobeyed me when I told you that you could never go kayaking on your own without supervision. How many times have I warned you about this? I hold you responsible, son. You're the oldest. You know how impulsive your sister can be. But would you listen to me? Obviously not. No, you refuse to listen. Neither of you are strong enough to negotiate the river. Yet you seemed hell-bent on disobeying me." "I'm really sorry, Daddy. I'm really sorry," says James, sobbing uncontrollably, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry, Daddy, and I'm sorry, Mummy." James's mother looks at her son with an objectionable disgust on her face. Her dark chocolate eyes, normally filled with warmth, are filled with dismay, regret, sorrow, and anger. She growls at James. "I'm ashamed to call you my son, James. I'm so disappointed in you. I always thought you were the responsible one. More fool me, who would look after your sister, but you failed her, James. You failed us. I can't bear to look at you. You're responsible for what happened. You're the reason that Emma is dead. I hope you're proud of yourself. Your sister is gone from our lives for good because of what you did. Look at the windy weather that we had this morning. The water was high. It looked feisty to me. As your father was wisely saying, we wouldn't have dreamed of taking you kayaking in such harrowing conditions today. But clearly you and your sister had other ideas. You weren't easily put off, were you? Why on earth didn't you go cycling instead, or something normal? Why the hell did you dice with danger? I don't understand you kids. I don't understand you at all. The mind boggles. she says, waving her hands above her head in exasperation. How am I expected to get over this, James? Tell me that, will you? Because I don't know the answer to that question myself. Mum, I don't know what I was thinking. I'm so sorry. Emma really wanted to go on the water. I didn't think it looked too bad. I really didn't. It was only when we were out there I realised it really was bad. But you know, Emma, she loves excitement. I don't care whether Emma likes excitement or not. I know she wouldn't have gone kayaking without you. All you had to do, James, was to put your foot down and say no, and she wouldn't have gone out on her own, would she? My heart is broken. I've lost my beautiful, beautiful daughter. How can a mother just move on with her life like this when she's lost her beloved child? I feel as if I died today with my daughter. A huge part of me is gone. It drowned in that water with her because you failed, James. You failed to use your brains. So there we are. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is very exciting because we do have another Bigfoot encounter coming on in the same story. So I can't wait for you to join me tomorrow night. Until next time, goodbye and good night.